tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So friends, this is the first day of the new year and the end of our 3-day retreat. And the new year or even birthdays are always a time to reflect on the nature of life. So one year has passed, another year has come. So, what is sort of the meaning of time? Well, what is the meaning of life? So I'd like to talk about the idea of evolution from a Dhamma point of view. And about the nature of life. So let's just take, for the sake of argument, that evolution, or most Buddhists would probably subscribe that the Darwin's theory of evolution is probably as close to any as terms of the way human species has evolved and the world has evolved. Now, taking that as a baseline, kind of just try to follow along this train of thought. So let's assume that the first cellular organisms arrived in the ocean, from whatever cause. And so those one-cell organisms, which is the one-cell organism is supposed to be the smallest unit of a living being. And so they, swam around and ate other one-cell organisms and gradually multiplied. Little by little, those organisms grew, and little fish and other types of living creatures, whether they're corals or other types of critters, evolved in the ocean. And as they got bigger, and that life was driven by the desire to live. So basically, the first evolution came out of the necessity to eat and to protect oneself or one's family, and to reproduce. But it was that drive for life, a basic desire to live. And anyway, as the species expanded, in order to protect themselves, then they mutated. So they developed ways to protect themselves or to, conquer the other enemies to get food. So all the different mutations developed in terms of growing armor or bigger teeth or so on. And so gradually the oceans filled up. But they basically evolved out of that necessity for protection and survival. And then gradually the oceans filled up. They were getting crowded. So, one fish or so decided to, poke his head out. He said, oh, there's some land there. So somehow they crawled out because of the overcrowding of the ocean. So they started to develop the land critters. And as they ate everything else up on the land, and one hungry animal kind of looked up and said, "Oh, there's some food up there." So they started to grow longer necks. And they started to grow claws that they could climb to get more food. And anyway, so gradually the evolution of the animals continued through all the different epochs and so on. And then up to even the human level. Because as the scarcity and the land was getting crowded with animals, and gradually they started to evolve their brains and evolve the ability to become, to walk. So the human beings were developed or evolved out of that. And then over the course of, so many thousands, millions of years, all the different types of species or races of people have developed due to, again, all of it was due to basically the environmental and climatic type of, environments. And it didn't involve much thinking. It kind of just happened automatically. And that evolution happened as kind of a group. Species evolved as a group. And these groups had their own characteristics. And, all the species of a group sort of conformed to that particular group ethic or characteristic. And so even up to the modern day humans, that we see also that basically all the different cultures that you find in the world today, various countries, races, and so on, they've developed their own particular identities and characteristics. And these traits are passed on through, genes. And they're passed on through just the cultural, hereditary. And basically, the people of those groups also conform to the group. Because if you don't conform to the group, then you get kind of ostracized. Or you're, cast out as a loner. And then that's very painful for most people. So people are pressurized to conform to the group consciousness. And so the physical forms of the bodies has evolved, and also the consciousness has evolved too. There was a consciousness of humans has evolved from the consciousness of apes, of lesser categories of animals and so on. But so far it's been a group evolution for the most part. And this is what is sometimes called the lower evolution or unconscious evolution. It doesn't involve too much thinking. Just to mimic what your parents do, mimic what the rest of the society does, or be pressured into, following those things doesn't require much creative thought or thinking, really. So it's basically that group evolution. And unconscious, because people aren't really thinking too much. They're just doing and conforming. And so evolution up to this point is kind of, reached that point of, this group evolution. But once in a while, there's an individual that starts to question, what is this group evolution? What is this, this conditioning? And somehow they start to question that, or question the authority that's trying to control everything. And the Buddha was some kind of individual like that. we're grown up in a society, a particular religion, right? So you're forced to kind of believe what the rest of the cultural society believes in terms of religious beliefs or political beliefs. And basically people don't question it much. But as I mentioned, from time to time, there are people who started to question. And this is the transition from group evolution to individual evolution, or the lower evolution and the higher evolution. So somebody like the Buddha, of course there was other, great religious saints too, but take for example the Buddha. So he questioned the religious authority of the time. And he was also kind of looked down upon for that, and blamed and criticized. Or people didn't want him to do that. But yet something inside, wasn't willing to accept those kind of conditioned beliefs. There was something deeper working inside of him. So he went off and became an individual, to lead the ascetic life. Of course, there were other ascetics doing similar things too. But so he went off on his own. But he also left those other ascetics because he wasn't satisfied with whatever teaching they had to offer. So he had to keep on going alone. Now he could have just accepted and stayed with the group and just attained the level of wisdom or whatever that the group offered. But something inside said, I don't know, I think there's something more, And that's basically the spark of truth that is lies within every being. But anyway, so this search for freedom led the Buddha to become a true individual and to leave the group. And as you know the story, the 5 ascetics that the Buddha was practicing with, they also shunned him. The Buddha, he's reverting back to a luxurious life, he's eating food again and this and that. And they even disowned him. But the Buddha had the courage to keep on going. So he was like the true individual, taking evolution into his own hands, not satisfied with the group evolution. And so, the example of the Buddha and even the example of us here in, this contemporary life. Like even myself, if you've read the story and so on, how I also, growing up in this, Christian kind of society and so on, but yet, something felt trapped and, in those times there was no internet or no temples here. So anyway, that trip took me to India. But, and by becoming a monk, in this culture, as, usually you're seen as a freak. But it takes courage to do that. But anyway, somehow we do that. And even all of you, even your interest in Dhamma may not be appreciated by your parents or your other relatives or others around you, or they question, why do you want to do that, meditate, But once you get a taste of, the truth, then you can't really, you don't care about those other things. So this is, the beginning of the individual evolution or the higher evolution. We don't want to stay contained by the group consciousness. Like just conform to the American dream, right? So, it takes a lot of courage to do that. So then people strike off on their own. And so they hear the Dhamma, You might read a book on the Dhamma about the Four Noble Truths and say, wow, I haven't heard that before. Where'd that come from? You know, about meditation. So you start hearing these things about Dhamma and about the promise of, you know, being able to discover yourself, you know, and the tools of meditation to make your own transformation of your mind, that you can actually change your mind without being doped up on lots of drugs and pills. And so we hear the Dhamma, and that triggers off this ancient truth that we all have inside, the quest for freedom. And so, of course, in the last 50 years, there's been a plethora of so many books, you know, on self-help and even the Dhamma, and you have all these different schools of Buddhism and yoga. And now with the internet, people are being flooded with all these promises of, you know, practice this kind of meditation, you get nirvana. Practice this kind of meditation, you get psychic powers, fly through the air. You know, practice fasting, or, you know, follow the precepts. And people are talking about karma and rebirth and nirvana. And people are saying, wow, that's cool, yeah. And so, you know, people, they read a lot of different things. And they start picking and choosing what they want to practice. Whatever fits their whim and fancy at the time. So they might read something about, you know, practicing celibacy. Okay, I'll be celibate. You know. Or fasting. Oh, I'll be a vegetarian. Thinking that by doing that, they're going to somehow get some quick special power. So they may do that, but it may not come as quick as they want, and then they say, I'm going to stop this. Let me do something else. And so they may practice, you know, something else. So they hear about chanting a mantra. Oh, yeah, I want to chant a mantra. Or anapanasati. Yeah, I want to, you know, concentrate at the tip of my nose and see the white light and get absorbed into that, and whatever power they think might come from that. Or so many other types of practices. And they try these things kind of in a haphazard way. But they don't put enough time into them, so that they never really get very deep in a lot of those practices. Or they get bored very quickly. And sometimes they even get burned out. And because of their practicing things with the wrong understanding, a lot of people have been damaged. Or they say enlightenment through drugs. You know, take enough LSD, you know, blow the top of your head off, or whatever. And of course, it literally did to some. But anyway. So anyway, the point is that, you know, people in the last 40, 50 years have been practicing the Dhamma kind of hit and miss. Practicing for a while and then giving up totally, and then going back to binging and so on. And they get burned out with that, and they go back to practicing the Dhamma again. And they're dabbling in this and dabbling in that because there's too many choices. And, you know, they may be getting some benefit from that kind of practice, but that kind of practice is called the path of irregular steps, because the practice is irregular. It's not following a tried and true kind of systematic path. And they're just picking and choosing. So, but even so, people do get some benefits from doing those things. But it's like, you know, they're practicing very hard, but it's like coming up against an invisible wall. You know, they can't see it, but it's like their practice begins to stagnate. It's like they've come against an invisible wall that they can't get beyond. You know, that breakthrough that they were hoping for, or entering the stream, or whatever it is they might do. And so they, you know, and then many people wind up at that wall for years and years, and until they die even. So what has to be done? Do we have to go all the way back to the beginning? Do we have to go all the way back and learn our spiritual ABCs? But what has to be done is a transition has to be made from the path of irregular steps to the path of regular steps, in which the path is more systematic and regular. And again, does that mean going all the way back to the beginning? In some cases, yes. It means going back and taking refuge. Because a lot of these New Age practitioners, they say, oh, I don't need any refuge. And they just grab these different practices and so on, thinking they're going to do it with their ego and they don't need anybody else and so on. But unfortunately, that has caused a lot of people problems and a lot of grief or getting into trouble. So that going for refuge is sort of like the foundation of the path of regular steps. Taking refuge is, especially in the Buddhist sense, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, because these are tried and true type of foundations. They're based on truth and practice over many thousands of years. And it implies a commitment. See, in this modern age, people don't like commitments, right? That's why less and less people are getting married these days. They don't want commitments. They want to be free just to do whatever they want to do. Now, that can be a good thing, but it can also lead to its own problems. So anyway, taking refuge means making a commitment to the Dhamma, making a commitment to truth, saying, I've had enough of all this wishy-washy, stuff, and haphazard practice. And so taking refuge is that foundation. And then the path of regular steps. Basically, it's the Eightfold Path. It's based on right understanding. That's why the Buddha started the first step of the Eightfold Path is right understanding. Understand what this is about. Have a clear understanding of the starting point and the goal and the intermediate points. And all of the different pitfalls and aspects of the practice. And so one, reads books on the Dhamma and, gains an intellectual understanding. So there's 3 levels of understanding. The understanding that you get from reading books or hearing talks on the Dhamma. Like maybe you've heard of a few talks in the last couple of days and you went, oh wow, that's something new. I haven't heard that before, That's cool, let me check that out, Impermanence, okay. So, if we don't hear something, then it'll usually just pass us by. So usually the way we learn is by hearing or reading to get our initial understanding. So it's called intellectual understanding or academic understanding, but it pricks your interest. It kind of gets you excited. Ah, yes, gives you hope. But then you have to go on thinking about the Dhamma. Because a lot of people read books and get, some interest, but then they get distracted and they don't go on really thinking about it. And after a week or two, they forget totally about it. At least for some period of time. Until something happens and they're, what did the book say? Go back and read the book again. So that's why in the path of regular steps, that right understanding is followed by right thought. That means you have to think about what you are reading or hearing. You have to think about the Dhamma. So it kind of goes deeper. And the second level of wisdom is the wisdom that comes through reflection and thinking about the Dhamma. Not just reading it and getting information, but contemplating it. Whether it's in meditation or at other times of reflecting, you're thinking about it and observing how it's working. And I had a very interesting experience in this transition from intellectual understanding to right thought. So when I first heard the Dhamma, I took a world religions class in junior college because I was going to travel around the world and travel over to Asia. So I wanted to learn a little bit about, religions of the countries I was going to go through. So we had to write a term paper about the religion that interested us the most. And I chose Buddhism. I don't really know why, but the textbook that we had was mostly talking about Zen Buddhism, but it mentioned life of the Buddha a little bit and so on. And it made some sense, the Four Noble Truths. And so I kind of related to that more than the others. And I had to write a term paper on it. And I actually got excited about writing a term paper. Who gets excited about writing a term paper? Right? And I hardly ever went to the library. But I was going to the library 2 or 3 times a week. And my mother was a school teacher. And she never saw me going to the library before. What's got into that boy? So I wrote this term paper. I went to the library, big public library, a big city, kind of a big city, in California. There was only 4 books on Buddhism. Christmas Humphreys, Alan Watts, and Encyclopedia Britannica or some other odd book. Can you imagine that? That was 1971. 4 books on Buddhism in the whole library. Now there's at least 4,000. Anyway, so I wrote that paper and I got an A+ on it. The teacher wrote on the paper, "I'm very impressed about your knowledge." But when I read that paper a few years later, I said, kid stuff, threw it away. But anyway, so that term paper got me interested in the Dhamma, got me a little bit of intellectual understanding. But then I was busy wanting to party. I'd been in the army for 3 years. For goodness sake, like in prison. That was the time of the hippie era, drugs, marijuana, parties, 1970. So I wanted to make up for lost time.
Woodstock.
Yeah, well, I missed that. Anyway, so I didn't go on thinking about it. See, this is the point. I didn't go on thinking about what I had read, which had interested me. I didn't go on thinking about it. And then I wound up getting into a lot of trouble because of that. Even getting wound up put in prison in Afghanistan of all ungodly places. But, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But, so I'm just mentioning that because showing that the necessity for the systematic practice and that right understanding that you have to go on thinking about what you've read. Otherwise, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. And the right thought leads to then the other aspects of the Eightfold Path practice, because you understand now, you contemplate, okay, the law of karma. If I do these kind of unskillful behaviors, painful results will come. And I saw that very clearly, the painful results of my negative actions, of taking too much drugs, doing some other unsavory things, experience the pain from them. And so that's how we can also understand how the law of karma, works. So anyway, so the path of regular steps, it's based on the right understanding and the right thought, which then helps you then to put all the other aspects of the Eightfold Path into the proper order. And the Eightfold Path is like a spoked wheel. The Dhamma wheel. The first sermon of the Buddha was setting the wheel of Dhamma in motion, depicted as a wheel, rolling a wheel. Now what happens for those who rode a bicycle? If you have a bicycle wheel and some of the spokes are broken or loose on it, what happens?
Bumpy ride.
Any idea?
Doesn't work.
Yeah, the ride won't be very smooth. It still might go a little bit, but it won't be, very smooth. It'll be wobbly, and at some point it may totally collapse. So in the same way, all the 8 spokes of the Eightfold Path have to be equally tightened. And when they're equally tightened, then the wheel rolls very smoothly toward your destination. So that is the the meaning of the path of regular steps. And in that way we start to evolve in the Dhamma. And as we practice the Eightfold Path and we develop mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, then we start to directly experience the changes in our own consciousness that practice is having, and how that affects our life also. But again, it takes a lot of courage to practice the Dhamma.